Hello and welcome everybody to Bortnik's YouTube channel. My name is James Talberg and I'm excited to be here today with Professor Bronner. Not just a professor for me no longer, but also a friend of mine that we're discussing a lot of interesting political and geopolitical situations. And some of those conversations I think are not just going to be interesting for me to hear, explore and analyze, but for our viewers and in general, the general public. Professor Bronner, thank you so much for making a time and joining us today for that podcast.
My pleasure.
So the topic that I want to bring up today and break down technically with you to deeply understand what is happening today in the world. Why do I think it's important? Because I think people are in a half sleeping mode. I don't think enough people understand the seriousity of the geopolitical changes and shifts that we're witnessing right now. And I'm saying this because I studied at a Jewish school. I'm a half Jew, my mom is Jewish, and I have studied in a Jewish school. And because of the Holocaust, because of what happened in the World War II, because of the genocide, it's a very sensitive topic for the Jewish people. And they put a big effort to educate and pass that knowledge onto the next generation so it doesn't repeat again. I think they're doing a great job. And I think something that I have noticed here, something that I have learned in that school, something that I have learned during these lessons and all the documentary films and movies that we have watched and all the history lessons that we were taught, is that a quote that just got engraved in my memory is that the evil will succeed if the good people will just remain passive and let it be.
Yeah, that's a famous line from Edmund Burke.
Perfect. Thank you for letting me know, because I just remember the line and I don't remember whose line is that.
All that it takes for evil to succeed is that people do nothing.
Incredible. If you can send me the name of that person later in the chat, so because I want to pull out that quote and make a poster in my bedroom now. That being said, let's dive into that geopolitical arena that we're analyzing and witnessing nowadays. I think there is a good amount of evil trends that people are just throwing a blind eye on it. And I think there's a lot of geopolitical shifts and geopolitical and political and national trends and cases that we're witnessing now that nobody is diving deep enough and analyzing well enough to understand what is going on, why it is going on, and what eventually will happen. Let's try to compare today's situation as much as we can, because history is different, situations are different, but how much are we similar today in terms of the geopolitical situation to a time prior to the Second World War or maybe the First World War, whichever is more relevant to whatever you think you're witnessing, not whatever you're analyzing, and what you think is more appropriate to compare us to. Maybe there are years that are similar. Maybe there are similar examples that have happened before the World War II that are happening now, before the World War II, to appease Hitler. I think that was the Prime Minister of Britain and another leader in the European continent that have met, and they kind of gave Hitler a green light, go take Czechoslovakia or Austria. Maybe there are similar cases now because Trump is basically trying to secure a peace deal by giving up on the Ukrainians' land without Ukrainians' permission. I don't know how similar those cases are, and I know how similar the situations are, and that's where we will need your knowledge and expertise. As much as we can, let's dive into that. How similar we are, what comparison we can make, and should people expect and prep for another tragedy that have happened already 80 years ago?
Well, I think the time you're alluding to. Let's think 1938, and the Nazis under Adolf Hitler had succeeded in a number of their foreign policy ventures. They'd taken over the Ruhr in 1934, taken back that territory that was taken from them in the First World War, reoccupied the Saar, another area, taken back from them. Taken over Austria and made claims on a certain part of Czechoslovakia, known as the Sudetenland, in which there were indeed many Germans. I mean, you can think here of, or at least people who identified with German culture. You can think of Crimea, if you like. Hitler had made a claim on this part of Czechoslovakia, and the question was, how does one stand up to this? Because it seemed clear that the Führer's ambitions were not stalled in the Ruhr or in the takeover of Austria, and this was looking to the point Hitler, the Nazis already had created a powerhouse, a juggernaut in Germany. That was clear. Meanwhile, the West had not mobilized since the First World War for a host of different reasons. So, in 1938, Prime Minister Chamberlain of England, Neville Chamberlain, and Edward Daladier of France, and Mussolini in Italy, came to Munich to discuss what to do with about Czechoslovakia. This was known as the Munich meeting of 1938. And what's crucial is that excuse me, neither the Soviet Union nor the Czechoslovakian president was invited. And what resulted was a willingness to give over the Sudetenland to Hitler, to a Nazi regime, a puppet regime. And it was assumed that, as Prime Minister Chamberlain said, we have achieved peace with honor. You know, there wasn't much honor in this. The assumption was, we have achieved peace in our time. There will be no further demands on the part of Hitler, and we have achieved, so to speak, their version of collective security back then. Of course, the issue then became Hitler, and in coordination with the Czech Nazis, basically subverting the rest of Czechoslovakia. The entire country was lost, and Hitler ultimately made further demands, namely Poland, in order to expand the Nazi empire, provide in Germany called Lebensraum, living space for the Germans. And World War I began. Ultimately, with Poland, it became clear that only violence, only military action could stop Hitler. And that was that. And what people believe, what many people believe, is that any time you try to appease a dictator, it turns into an extension. Forgive me. And it allows for the extension of his ambitions. The old line, those who ignore history are condemned to repeat it. You can make the other argument too. Those who look at history as some genuine repetition are condemned to repeat disaster as well. Appeasement was the justification that the United States used in resisting in its incursions in Vietnam. This was seen as an extension of world communism. The North Vietnamese battle, and it wasn't. And using the same logic, was called at that point the domino theory. The United States found itself mired in a political nightmare. So, how does this relate to today? That's what I think you're asking.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It seems the question is the following, and here are the similarities. It seems to me, I could be wrong, but this is my view, that President Putin is seeking to recreate the Russian Empire. Not sure whether it's the empire of the Tsars or that of the Soviet Union, the old Soviet Union, but the attempt to recreate an expanded Russia, it seems to me undeniable, especially if one takes very recent events.
If I may, I'll just add my point into that. I think he's more looking for the Russian Empire direction because Soviet Union was a country of many nations. Russian Empire was specifically about.
Well, that's true. That's
Russian Empire, right?
That's a fair point. Whether we want a number of different nations subordinate to a hegemonic nation, as in the Soviet Union, or we want an empire which basically subsumes all nations into itself, like the old Russian Empire. That seems to be an open question. What's not an open question is that the events of the past week, which include the unleashing of the drones against Poland and Romania, this seems to be an extension of or let's put it this way, an indication of a possible extension of the attack on Ukraine. At least as I can see it, if you think back, Poland has always been a thorn in the side of Russia. This was true under the Tsars when it belonged to Russia. There was no Poland in that regard. But it was also true in the Soviet Union in the early attacks of the Red Army against Poland. And even I'll give you another example. This is a personal example. I remember this is at least 25, 30 years ago. I took a train from Berlin to Moscow. I just wanted to see it. We got to the Polish border. The train stopped, and we were left in this sort of a tunnel. And something I hear, everybody gets out of the train, and we hear this penetrating noise. I mean, you would think war had been unleashed. What was being done was that the wheels were being changed, and new wheels were being put on the train.
Oh, because the size of the difference between the railroads.
Precisely,
Yeah.
the rails.
Yeah.
Apparently, Stalin had purposefully done this, that
Yeah.
at the border, new rails were constructed.
I think in the Soviet Union they were a little bit more narrow.
It
If
could
I'm
be
correct. Yeah.
that I don't know. I leave
Yeah.
this to your engineering skill. But the point is, what that shows is a certain fear, a certain, I'd say, paranoia, or if you want to take it to the extreme, but certainly a fear of Poland and a view of Poland as an enemy, or at least an ally of any enemy that will invade the Soviet Union. Romania, of course, also has its communist past and reactionary past as well. So the issue then for today is, what do we see? What's the similarity to 1938? We see in Ukraine, there is a territory, Crimea, and especially parts of the Donbass, which Putin can claim, or tries to claim, belong to Russia for cultural reasons and for the suppression of their rights. Number one. Number two, this can easily lead, the question becomes the following. Even if we were to grant this, even if this were, if you were willing to agree with that claim of Putin's, he is also making a claim for that corridor that runs between, what is it, 4 different regions of Ukraine.
We can say provinces. They have regions,
Provinces.
but similar to our provinces system, yeah.
Yeah.
Or state system in US.
Which he doesn't control. It's one thing to make a claim for areas which you've conquered more or less militarily. It's another to say this isn't enough. We also make a claim and justify aggression against this in the name of securing this corridor. What would this mean? This would mean the dissolution of Ukraine, obviously. Next, what do we see in the West? We see if we think of the NATO nations, what we see is a clear lack of mobilization at home, and shall we say, an avoidance of securing their military strength, either in united fashion or singularly. In other words,
I can even dive into that deeper. I've talked with one of your colleagues. We have recorded a good podcast. I just don't know if he wants his name to be mentioned here right now, so I'm not going to mention the name. But he's an expert in the European security, and he's saying that major European countries are at their worst preparation and mobilization for the past 100 or 200 years. Like, they're not just prepping, they're not ready at all, they're not mobilized at all. They're at their weakest state for the past 200 years.
My project for the last 6 months has been to reread or to read Winston Churchill's memoirs, and this is exactly how he defines the Europe of 1938. Plus, the blindness, or I don't know how to put it, the sort of sense of uncertainty but desire for peace. In other words, where it's sort of, Europe is immobile. It's on the one hand being threatened, but it's not fully under attack. This was a cultural attitude that appeared roughly between 1938 and 1940, just after the Second World War broke out. Jean-Paul Sartre, the great philosopher and novelist, called it the reprieve. It was just this feeling of sort of fear and trembling that that marked this interlude. I think that exists too. Secondly, next, the Alaska Summit, which was almost unbelievable, that was organized by President Trump. If you consider this, Ukraine was not invited. Europe was not invited. In other words, it was a partial negotiation that was undertaken, which was, in my opinion, more or less doomed to failure, as with so many of President Trump's.
Well, a doomed failure in terms of providing and securing peace for Ukraine and Europe, but maybe it was extremely successful from the perspective of like their Alaska and their Arctic business deals and infrastructure projects they're planning to go with together. So maybe it's for us doomed to fail. You know what I mean? Like maybe for them that was incredibly valuable and successful.
That's a very good point. Of course, if you want to be the mediator, you can't immediately make a deal with one side against the other and expect the other to agree with it, right? A mediator is basically an empowered umpire, as in a soccer match or something like that. You're quite right about that.
But there is something that I want to ask you. The Democrats, I think, were in power probably for about 2 years or a year and a half for the duration of the Ukrainian war. If they had a better understanding that they should not appease a dictator and they have warned Ukraine that the war can start, why haven't they mobilized their NATO allies and their own economy to finish the war right there, right then?
Let me answer this.
I'll just add another point. Because of their, I don't want to say failure, because it's not a failure, because they have helped Ukraine to the point that Ukraine survived as a country, as a state, and they have helped Ukrainian refugees, and they have helped NATO to start mobilizing themselves and reindustrialize themselves in terms of the war perspective and everything. So they did something. They've done a lot, but that was nearly not enough to finish it right there, right then. Like that was way too soft. And because of that, basically, I think because of that, or one of the main reasons why Trump came to power, is because of their failure.
Let me take the last point first. I don't think that's true, actually. For America, traditionally, unless America is directly involved militarily, foreign policy has always been low on the level of issues for votes. Secondly, though, I think it's important to understand, and perhaps here it is useful to go back to 1938. This was not this was not a situation where you had, shall we say, the left or the social democratic movement supporting rearmament and the conservatives not supporting rearmament. There were plenty of conservatives who did support rearmament, like Churchill and Anthony Eden.
Yeah.
That's their whole. And on the other hand, there were plenty of anti-fascists who initially, at least, had the slogan "Jamais la guerre," and never again war. I mean, let's put it this way: for us, and we have to recognize this. There's a certain modesty that's necessary. It's very easy to call for military buildup, military intervention, airstrikes, and the like, if you're not making the call.
Of course, because you're not going to bear the responsibility.
Precisely. Now, think of what President Biden, when he responded to this, think about what would have occurred if he wouldn't have responded. You know, the choice here was not to say to him, do more. The immediate question that's begged is, what more? You want more stuff, more military, more material. There was a lot of material given by the United States, which outweighed that of other countries combined.
Like, if I may, I think there was an opportunity to give them more financial troubles. I think Russia wasn't ready for that war. I think they started that war unprepared. I think they have assumed that they're going to take over Kiev over a week. They have literally said that on all the propaganda. Propagandist chant. Yeah, it's like it's a stroll to the neighborhood, to a neighborhood. And Russia is what, economically, in terms of the GDP, less than the California state. I think if they would have cut them economically and would block them and pressure on India and on China not to help them by purchasing their energy resources, it would have been potentially, I'm not an expert, it's just in theory, I might be completely wrong, but it could have damaged them way more there than now, because they were less prepped and they haven't had that time for the adaptation. Now Russia have adapted. Now also Trump have, I don't know how, that's a question, it's a different podcast, but he somehow not just initiated a trade war with China, which was inevitable because now it's a fight, a war between civilizations, but he also somehow messed up the relationship with India. Yes, so now they're just like straightforward.
By calling, though, to be fair, some of what you called for, you know that President Trump has now put forward the demand for the Europe not to buy any maritime oil.
I know, but it's too late. If Biden would have done that in the first month of war, it had a better, higher chance probability of success. Now it's pointless.
But
yeah.
Now, James, you can also do it the other way around, though. Russia at this point has now lost a million people. It should be totally, by this logic, it should be totally exhausted. Its economy should just be shattered. It, as I say, it's even brought in North Korean forces. And of course,
well, there is truth to it because they're stuck on the eastern of Ukraine. They haven't even got to the central.
Yeah.
So they are exhausted.
And there is sort of a kind of trench warfare. The adaptation, I think, is the use of drones. I think that's the real adaptation.
And economically, because their economy adapted.
Yeah, but think about what we may have underestimated the power of the Russian economy in the beginning, because after 3 years of war, after 1 million people lost, after a constant growth of the military budget, what would make sense is that today the situation is more dire for them than it was previously. And I don't think that's...
We can make that argument, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is one of the problems with the appeasement theory. It's a morally induced politics. In other words, it says it would say to had Biden responded more forcefully, Europe could say, "Yeah, let's you and him fight." The question is, though, for Europe, was Europe ready to up the ante? And there it wasn't. If you want to think about it in terms of stopping or impacting Putin, I don't want to do some kind of blanket defense of President Biden, but had he not moved the way he did, and there was a lot of money sent, or a lot of material sent.
Yeah, and a lot of military aid specifically, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this way, many criticized him within his own party. Others criticized him within the Republican Party, but the Republican Party did not extend serious support, and that has to be understood. When
Speaking of the money, just if we may pause here for a second, how much do you think U.S. have actually supplied Ukraine? Because they're trying to get out of Ukraine back 250 billion, and they're claiming that they have provided Ukraine 350 billion, and all this deal around all these minerals and resources that they're trying to squeeze that out of Ukraine and get more out of them they have invested. Did they actually supply Ukraine $350 billion?
Well, you know as much as I do on this. I assumed that was the case, and I'm not in a position to disprove it or prove it. I just don't know. I just assumed that this was the case. It seemed clear that from the beginning to now,
we might never know, and I find that weird that so much money of the taxpayers people have been sent, and there is like no control. We don't know where that money went. We don't know the exact amount. We basically know nothing. And then now we're blaming it on Ukraine because Ukraine is apparently corrupted, and yes, they are. And sure, they stole somewhere along the line that money. But at the same time, well, we knew before the war that they are corrupted. Why haven't we came up with certain systems?
See, but if you want to make that argument, the moral issue becomes cloudy in supporting Ukraine. From the other side, the argument is NATO expanded into Eastern Europe through missiles in Poland, through facilitating a request by Ukraine to join NATO and the EU, which this is the argument made by some, which led Putin to attack, provoke Putin into attacking.
Do you agree with that, Semaine? Do you think that's the case?
No. It's one thing to, I think I've said this before in your program, it's one thing to poke the bear. It's another thing for the bear to respond by ripping off your face. Putin had many different options besides invading Ukraine, unless he wanted to. And as you know better than I, the claims made on Ukraine go back, shall we say, beyond 40
Well,
years.
it just goes back to his very first statement where he thinks that the collapse of the Soviet Union is his personal biggest tragedy in history, right? Yeah. No, totally. Okay, so, but today the situation is very complex. It's very easy to...
I'd like to just add one other thing, if I can. Of course. What is different today? Certainly the type of alliance, the countries in alliance are different today than they were in 1938. But there's one crucial element here, and that is nuclear weapons.
Yes, I just wanted to mention that too, yeah.
In 1938. So today the issue is, and the assumption that has to be made by really going in hard against Putin, to the point where we're talking about military troops, and we are talking about military troops. Yeah.
Yeah, the Canadian Prime Minister have mentioned that. Yep.
Yeah, and President Macron as well. Are we willing to take the risk that Putin will not use nuclear weapons, especially when he said they would? In other words, if you want to come in hard, you have to assume that Russia will not strike this way, unless, of course, the West is willing to deal with nuclear war.
Well, I doubt somebody wants to deal with nuclear war, especially over Ukraine.
But then you have to adapt your policies accordingly. What I would suggest in this regard, at least for the intermediate future, one, seize the $300 billion of Russian funds in the West and essentially use it for Ukraine. Two, I think that the loopholes have to be closed for the oligarchs.
Hold on, Professor Bronner, you're already going with solutions and examples and strategy. Before you dive there, just so like I'll drop on you a couple more topics and perspectives and situations, and then I would like to discuss with you how do we go from there. Like what are the moves that we can potentially take? So, if I may, I'll try to describe what do we have right now geopolitically. The main geopolitical, it's not a fight yet, but a power game, a muscle game. The geopolitical tension is now between the US and China, or the global Southeast bloc. Like BRICS. That's the major, basically BRICS, but I don't know if it's so much BRICS, because Brazil, for example, I doubt that Brazil will be part of that bloc. They are now temporarily, but I think that United States, North America, and South America, at the end, they will have a closer relationship between themselves versus Brazil and China, or Brazil and India. So that's why I'm not so concerned about BRICS, if I may say that way, because I think it's a tactical alliance, but it's not an institutional bloc that will function. I may be wrong. That's just my intuition and my perspective.
Actually, you're right. And just to what's interesting is that, shall we say, what's happening in the West is willy-nilly becoming very similar. If we don't want NATO to move with the United States, what Europe is doing is putting together a coalition of the willing in support of...
there is a lot of like agreements now between Germany and Britain, Britain and France, Britain and Germany. Like they don't trust this Article 5 in NATO anymore. Like they're doing internal additional agreements in case of a war.
Which is sort of like a mirror image of, shall we say, the authoritarian alliance.
Yeah.
Yeah. The institutional structure that NATO provided is absent, along with
it's in the past. It's in the past. Yeah.
Yeah. And this I think is a direct function of President Trump's policy.
We can make that statement. I think he's made a couple of geopolitical mistakes that we view them temporarily as mistakes that have led to this. But let's go back to the general situation. So I think the main fight is going to be between the Western civilization, the Western bloc, the European Union, US, Canada. I think Mexico will be part of that deal as well. Of course, Britain, New Zealand, Australia, Japan, and South Korea as well, potentially going to be on board. So I think that's one block. And the other block is led by China, like real talk. Like the leader there is China. So the main fight, I hope that that's going to be an economical and cultural fight, is going to be between the West and the Eastern bloc, Southeastern bloc that is led by China. So from that perspective, why would the West keep or continue ruining their relationship? That, well, there is not a relationship anymore, but just for the example use, why would they continue worsen their relationship with the Russians, with Russia, when the actual enemy, quote unquote, is a southeastern bloc that is led by China? And I think that's exactly why, one of the reasons why Trump is trying to appease Putin, the dictator in Europe. It's because he's trying to put a block between Russia and China. I don't think it's working well. I think it's a lost fight, and Alaska have proved it.
I think it's a lost cause, though.
Yeah, but let me just, because I can lose my point. But I think it is just so much more complicated than what we have witnessed, that we can read and learn from the history before the World War II. Because before the World War II, the situation was a little bit more straightforward. It's easier for us now to say so. But again, before the World War II, they had two enemies, the Nazi regime in Germany and the Soviets. Mm-hmm. At the end, they have all united against the Nazi regime, and the war began.
Careful.
And
if I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
Soviet Union, and Lord knows I've never been a friend of communist regime, but prior to Munich, the Soviet Union was actually supporting a stronger anti-fascist response. This was one of the reasons for the purges that took place in 1938. They supported a strong response to Germany, which of course was also a traditional enemy. And once the Munich Agreement was made, that's when the Soviet Union changed course and sought an alliance with Hitler. One doesn't know in advance often what will result. I mean, looking back, it's easy to say, well.
Yeah, it's always looking back. It's easier to say, yeah, of course. In retrospective, everybody's smart and intelligent.
Yeah, and today I think the issue was that if it were as you said,
if we're back to today's situation, let me just finish it.
Yeah.
So it's very complex. The main enemy is the Southeast Bloc led by China. Russia is the mediator player here. Like realistically, they're not the main threat. And that's exactly why we have those issues of slow or ineffective rearmament of Europe, because they think Russia is weak because look, they can't even take over Ukraine. They're not even just capable of taking half of Ukraine. They're stuck somewhere in Donbass, and that's so far. So Europe haven't figured out how much of in a threat position they are.
Correct.
Because like they haven't figured it yet. Then they don't have political leadership that can craft any independent solution. Like European leaders they're just politically dependent on the United States. The United States, when Trump came into power, that's just my theory, but they have made a couple mistakes along the way. Trump just have picked up fight with everybody. I don't know for what reason. If the main challenge, the main threat was from China, well, then consolidate and unite the Western Bloc and go against China. But no, he tried to squeeze juices out of Europe. He tried to squeeze juices out of Canada. He tried to squeeze juices out of Mexico. Along the way, he tried somehow to fix the war in Ukraine. That didn't work out, obviously. He also tried to fix the war in Israel and Palestine. That didn't work, obviously, because he just tried everything all at once. It's like you have two hands, but you're trying to catch 20 toys. Now, somehow things are a little bit more clear, but now it's too late because now India is turning a back, or at least a shoulder. Now China and Russia have deeper relationship during these 3 years. They're kind of like openly now supporting each other more than they used to at the beginning of the war. So what do we do now? The main enemy politically, I hope that doesn't get into a full scale war with arms and nuclear weapons. It's China and the Southeast Bloc. Russia is part of it. How do we deal with that? How do we fix the war in Ukraine? How do we deal with Putin, that from one hand is a dictator, just like you've mentioned, he's already testing out NATO and sending drones to Poland, and they're just testing the water. I get it, but how do we deal with him? Like, from one perspective, we need to drag Russia out of that Southeast Western bloc led by China, but from a different perspective, we can't appease a dictator because the dictator is just gonna keep moving forward.
Yep.
And how do we fix now an internal relationship inside the Western bloc? Because the relationship between Canada and US, not ideal. Like, it's bad. The relationship between US and the European Union is horrible. Like, the communication is just broken. Yeah, they're like politically moving because they have great institutions between themselves, but it's just so complex. And if we look at that situation from a zoom out at that complexity, what do we do as a West to fix it?
All right, the macro perspective on Trump, I think, is this. His view of foreign relations is transactional. And what that means is...
Sorry, it's just very funny. So I like that you've mentioned that, because don't you think that's hilarious that we have a civilization war and he's like looking at it from a transactional view?
James, hilarious is not the word I would use, but let's put it this way. It's pretty foolish what he's doing.
Yeah.
Basically, I think his foreign policy, if I can say it quickly, is predicated on 3 or 4 factors. One is it's transactional. It has to benefit him. 2, it's unpredictable, because what benefits him will change and can change in an instant.
And not necessarily connected to the benefit of the nation or the Western civilization or the Western bloc.
It's him. It is l'état c'est moi. The state is me.
But he does play the national card. He does play the nationalist card.
Well, yeah, but it's always him. It's the charismatic personality that defines the nation. And the last point is one of impatience. That it has to serve him immediately. It has that the transactional decision must serve him right now. So what happens here, I think, is that there's a reduction of strategy to tactics. There is no strategy, whether towards Europe or Russia or China. There are a simple set of tactics which, instead of...
And we pause here. Western civilization, West as an entity, at its biggest historical crisis for the past 400 years, has no strategy, but
Correct.
Just living on a tactic strategy right now.
Yeah. And I think the way that shows is exactly through what you just articulated. Trump is trying to set up transactional interactions with each particular person. In other words, it's a completely mechanistic thing. He believes that since the United States is stronger than all these countries, whatever the transactional interaction with one particular nation, he'll win. So there's no overview. There's only France, Germany, Canada, China, India, what have you. That's what makes the complexity, because you have all these separate deals going on at once, which prevent any kind of strategy that deals with the whole. And here, I think, if I were to say on a macro level, what should be done, I think Trump has done exactly the wrong thing. If you're going to align yourself with one of the authoritarian states, it's not Russia, it's China. If you're going to try and create divisions within the bloc of authoritarian nations, what you want to do is separate out, or what you want to do is isolate Russia from its allies. And that's exactly what Trump hasn't done. He's done exactly the opposite. He's drawn Russia closer to China and certainly to India. And I don't know what this is going to mean for Europe if Trump is threatening 50 to 100% tariffs for nations to sever all oil deals with Russia. This is, how shall we say, both an insult and a belligerent tactic. Europe has mostly severed its oil connections with Russia. The only thing that's left is the maritime stuff. Why is Trump doing this? Obviously, because he wants Europe to buy its oil from the United States. This is, and so what's happening, I think, is that the United States is setting itself apart from all the other nations because it thinks it can prove triumphant over each nation individually. It's a crazy strategy. If it's a crazy set of tactics, since it's not a strategy. Russia, meanwhile, there's not really any agenda at the moment. I mean, there are, as I said before, there are things that can be done. And let me see if I can list a few of them now. One is there's $300 billion in frozen assets. This can be transferred to Ukraine. Secondly, it would seem to me that one could close. The only people who are making money on this are the oligarchs, and it would seem to me that closing the loopholes on that they're employing is crucial. I think it's also crucial to push Ukraine in the direction of, how should we say, strengthening its anti-corruption units. The fourth thing I think we at the moment is we should be pushing Europe to, shall we say, heighten its military capacities, not by withdrawing from Europe, but by aiding Europe in doing that. I mean, that's where I think the primary, or that's where a crucial element of American aid should go. But as you know, American aid has been almost completely obliterated, or I should say, eviscerated through the Trump regime. I mean, I think the best hope is a Democratic victory in 2028. It may not solve the problems, but at least there can at least be a dialogue with these people, whereas a dialogue with the Trump faction or the Trump minions seems to be almost impossible. I don't see it unless, how should I say, there's going to be these kind of transactional surrenders to the United States. And it's hard to believe that an American president is calling for a 50 to 100% tariff rise on any country that does business with the Soviet Union, which is India and China and North Korea. So the result of this would have to be that these three nations and Russia draw closer together. This is a completely counterproductive approach that's being employed.
Unfortunately, I'm running out of the battery, so we'll have to finish the podcast here. But I also think that that's interesting that we can push for the next podcast, the conversation, what can be done, what could have been done to actually just come up with a solid strategy how to take on all these challenges and how to potentially avoid a bigger global tragedy. Professor Bronner, thank you so much for your time today. And for people who are watching us and listening, if you want to take a look closer into Professor Bronner's work, Professor Bronner have wrote an amazing article that I have read already about the appeasement and about the comparison between 1938 to 2025. We will attach it in the description under that video. So go ahead if you're interested and find that link in the description. Professor Bronner, thank you so much again for your time, and we'll be back next time with solution-based podcast.
I look forward to it.
Thank you so much.
Great.